There's something my sister would want you to have.
Leia Saber.
Today we're going to look at 4 different versions of Leia Saber from Disney, Hasbro, LGT, and SaberForge. Then we'll compare them side by side to determine which is the right version for you. First, let's look at Disney. Leia's Legacy Lightsaber was first released on May the 4th, 2021 as a 2-piece box set with the Skywalker lightsaber. This set sold out quickly and now goes for $500 to $700 on eBay. This was shortly followed by a single saber release, which is still available for $170 at the Disney parks, and sometimes online on shopdisney.com. For both versions, the hilt is identical and the blades are sold separately. They use the same blades as the rest of the Legacy lightsabers, which come in 26, 31, and 36-inch varieties and are available at the Disney parks for $50 to $55. The single release comes in the traditional gray crate container. The logo on the front is different for each saber. For Leia's, they chose the New Republic logo in blue, which is very appropriate. When you open the lid, you see the saber displayed with its thin neck emitter. If you take out the plastic insert, you'll find the combat emitter hidden underneath. The first thing to notice about the Legacy lightsaber hilt is the coloring. What's meant to be a copper color all throughout the hilt is actually a couple of different colors. You have a pretty nice light copper color up in the emitter. In the switch section, it's very plasticky looking orangish brown. Also in the pommel, it's that same orangish brown. And then you have a very light, shiny kind of rose gold color in the handle. So 3 different materials and shades for what should be the same color throughout is a little bit odd. This is particularly noticeable in the combat emitter, which has that almost plasticky looking orange, you know, in enough places and in big enough sections that it becomes much more noticeable. The emitter itself has some very nice detailing. The activation button looks really nice here with the faux pearl inlay on the button. Of course, that's a fake button. It doesn't actually do anything. The actual activation button is down here on the hilt. It slides up and down on the handle. This is because when you do swap out that emitter, which we'll talk about in a second, the entire section from here up gets replaced. So they wanted to keep all of the electronics down below, which meant moving the connector down below. You can ignore the stickers on the pommel and the switch. Those are just to instruct you on how to operate it, and those peel right off. The faux pearl inlays on the handle also look really, really nice out of the box. It's got that nice shiny look to it. The only problem with those is a lot of people have reported that over time, especially if you live in hot environments or store these in hot locations, they start to, the plastic of the inlay starts to peel and curl back. When reported to Disney, Disney has not really been willing to work with people on exchanges or fixes with this. But most of the people who have tried reattaching them with a little epoxy glue or super glue have had really good luck getting those to go back to their original good as new look. The pommel is removable. You can just twist it off to access this speaker module and to change your 3 AAA batteries. You just unscrew this. This will split into 2 containers and you can replace the batteries. Slides back in, reconnect. On the bottom of the pommel, you do have a D-ring that you can pop up to connect it to your belt. It's nice and stiff, so it's not going to flop around. So that's a really nice aspect of it. It does have the legalese printed onto the bottom, which is something you're going to see standard in just about every Disney or Hasbro official release one. If you want to display the saber on your shelf, this thin neck emitter is perfect. But if you want to attach a blade, there's just no room to put one of the standard Disney blades into this emitter. So that's where that combat emitter comes in. You can screw this one off, set it aside, and then you take this combat emitter, which has the connectors there to connect to the electronics in the hilt. Screw that back on. And then you have a saber which, might not be as pretty and thin as it's supposed to be, but is thick enough that it can actually accept a blade. Now it has this little stopper in there to keep it clean, so you need to remove that. And then with one of the standard Galaxy's Edge Legacy Lightsaber blades, you just turn it until the tabs meet, push it in, turn it. Once you have the blade installed, it's time to turn it on. Remember, this is a fake button, so your actual activation switch is down here on the hilt. So you slide it up, and on comes your light. Like all of the Legacy lightsabers, there's a string of LEDs in the blade that lights up in 4 sections. The weird thing about this one is that when it extends, it lights up, 1, then 2, then 3, then 4 to give it that illusion of extending. But when you turn it off, rather than retracting the same way, turning off, 4, then 3, 2, then 1, it just flashes and the whole thing goes off at the same time. So it extends gradually, but then turns off all at once, which is a very strange choice. Now the speakers are okay. It's not terribly loud, but not terribly bad. The blade is just not as bright as most of the other versions of the saber that you'll see. We'll do a side-by-side comparison when we get to the end. So it's good enough electronics that you're gonna have fun swinging it around, but compared to the other 3 that we're gonna look at, it is definitely the most basic electronics, which might make sense since it is the cheapest of the 4. Next, we have Hasbro's Black Series ForceFX Elite lightsaber. Released in the fall of 2022, this lightsaber bundle costs $265 and is available at Target, Walmart, Best Buy, GameStop, Entertainment Earth, and a variety of other retailers. It comes in the same fancy box as all the other ForceFX Elite lightsabers. These boxes look great with their angular shape and beautiful art, but they can be a pain to open. I recommend opening them from the side instead of the bottom. Inside, you'll find the hilt, battle emitter, blade, and vertical display stand. There's no belt clip in this set. Unlike the Disney version, on the Hasbro one, the copper color is exactly the same all the way down the blade. It has a very, very shiny, almost a shiny penny kind of look to it. It looks a little bit darker in the video than it actually is. This color here is what it looks like consistently all the way through. That right now you're seeing the reflection of the black monitor that's behind it. Collects fingerprints fairly easily, but also looks much, much nicer than the Disney one. The gray portions have this nice matte finish on them, which also looks very nice. Instead of faux pearl inlays, these ones have a single color plastic inlay that goes all the way down and also shows up on the strip up at the top. Normally the strip up here is the same color as the metal. Here they've chose to make it the same material as the inlays. The activation button on this one is also very nice, with a copper ring around it and the same material as the inlays for the button itself. It actually is the activation button too, which is fantastic. To replace the batteries, you unscrew this one screw right here that looks exactly like all the other screws all around. Once you remove the instructions sticker, you're gonna need to remember which one it is. I don't know why they didn't put some indication there. Be very careful with a very small flathead screwdriver. If you use a larger screwdriver as you're turning it, you can scratch the metal on the grip here. It's not very strong metal, so I've seen several people get this all scratched up by using a larger screwdriver. So just very carefully unscrew it. Once you get the screw all the way out, set it aside where you won't lose it and unscrew the pommel. The battery compartment is in the bottom here. If you have batteries in it, it should come out with just a quick shake. If you don't have batteries in it, there's not enough weight in this, so you're gonna have to like grab hold of this part and pull it out. Now the battery compartment itself has a little bit of design on it to make it a little bit, fancier looking, although you're never gonna see it since it's in there. And it takes 3 AA batteries. Like the Disney version, the Hasbro version comes with 2 separate emitters. The display emitter with a distinctive thin neck design, and the battle emitter, which is a bit wider to be able to fit a blade inside of it. Unlike the Disney version, it's just the emitter that gets swapped out. The switch portion is still part of the handle, which is what allows that activation button to still work since the electronics can stay in one piece. It is, however, a little bit more of a pain to insert the blade on the Hasbro one here. After you remove the display emitter, before you add on the battle emitter, you have to first attach the blade. Now it has the same kind of nubs that a Legacy lightsaber blade would have, although it is a different mechanism, it's not compatible with the legacy ones. So that gets, you know, pushed in and turned until it locks in place. And then you have to take this and slide it over the blade all the way down until it gets down here, and then screw it into place. This gives it a nice sturdy connection since you have the entire emitter piece locking it into place. But as you slide that metal ring up and down the blade every time you want to change it, it's very, very likely that that the metal of the emitter ring is going to scratch up the blade over time. And keep in mind that this blade is not compatible with any other sabers. So if you do get your blade scratched up, you can't get a replacement without replacing the whole saber. To turn it on, you just hit that activation switch and it comes right on. Unlike the legacy one that lights up in 4 blocks, this one goes LED by LED individually up and down the blade. So when you turn it on or turn it off, it's a much smoother retraction or expansion. Looks fantastic. You'll also notice that the blade is much brighter. Turn off some lights there. Whereas the blade in the legacy one is very, very dim. This one has a nice, brilliant, vivid blue. To balance it out though, you can barely hear the speaker. It's a very, very quiet speaker. As far as functionality, you can hit it to get flash effects. There is a hidden button on the bottom. It looks like one of the screws, but it's actually a little button there that you can use to fire off the blaster blade. There's like 4 or 5 points along the blade that if you hit it, it will pick one of them at randomly and light it up for a moment. And I think there's a couple of other things. If you hold the thing down and hold the blade against something, it'll do that that wall melting effect. So that's holding down that auxiliary bottom button, fires that off. So beautiful blade, great extension and retraction, terrible speaker. Next is the LGT lightsaber, available through Darkwolf, Padawan Outpost, Elegant Weapons, and a bunch of other LGT resellers. Each seller sets their own price, but to use Darkwolf as an example, they're $240 empty, $290 for RGB baselit, $365 for Xenopixel, and $445 for Golden Harvest. The LGT version is easily the shiniest of all of the versions, with both the silver and the copper being this highly, highly shiny and reflective material. The copper is the same color all the way through the hilt. Again, it's a little hard to tell just because it's so reflective that you're seeing the reflection of my computer screen that makes it look a lot more black. But if you look along the bottom, or this color here is what it looks like on all of the copper versions. And the silver looks like this on all of the silver portions. This is definitely much shinier than what you see in the movie, but for some people this highly reflective, shiny version might be a personal preference over screen accuracy. You'll notice that on this version, instead of having pearl or faux pearl inlays, the inlays are just the same shiny silver metal as the rest of the hilt. Like the shininess, this might not be screen accurate, but it actually is a pretty decent look if you're not trying to mimic what's on screen. The activation button is the only place that you see an attempt at the marbled or pearl pattern. This one looks a little bit more marble than pearl on the activation button, which again is a functional activation button on this one. The grips are very low profile, very smooth, very easy to hold. It's actually much, much more comfortable in the hand than it looks like it would be in the photos. Even if you want to hold it by the choke point, it's actually remarkably comfortable. Don't grab it up here, that's a little bit too wide. Your fingers are gonna go in there and be very uncomfortable. But if you do it right here, it's actually a pretty comfortable place to hold it. And so if you're spinning it around, you can actually grip it there. This is nice and rounded, so it's not gonna cut up your hand. It's actually fairly comfortable. And there's only one activation button, it doesn't have a hidden one down here. So wherever you're holding it, as long as you have your thumb near the activation switch, you're not going to accidentally fire anything off. To access the battery and the rest of the internals, you'll unscrew the base of the hilt right there. It comes with the same 18650 battery that a lot of the custom lightsabers have. There is no built-in recharge port, so you will have to remove the battery and charge it on a separate charger. There are a lot of options for chargers on Amazon. I would recommend getting one that has a display screen so that you can see the status of each individual battery, and one that will automatically stop charging once the battery is full. That way you don't accidentally overcharge the battery if you leave it charging overnight. After having mine for several months, I'm noticing that it's getting a little bit difficult to reattach this center section. The threads are very, very thin, and they're starting to scratch up a little bit right at the very ends. So when I'm trying to reattach it, it's kind of difficult. I found that if you remove the pommel first, that gives it a little bit more room to move, so you can more easily reattach the center easily, and then reattach the pommel. You'll also notice that the D-ring on the pommel flops around a lot. On all the other ones, if you set it to the side, it's sticky enough that it will actually stay there. On this one, it kind of flops around while you're using it, which can get kind of annoying. Unlike the Disney and Hasbro ones, you don't need a separate emitter to attach the blade. At the top, you've got about a 1-inch deep channel with a connector underneath it. So all you have to do is take the blade, which is just a tube. It doesn't have the large black connector piece. It's just the tube and the connector. So if you take the blade, just slip it into that channel and get it firmly down. You can almost see where the pins are in the middle there. The blade has to flatten on the pins so that it's nice and firmly connected. And then you take an Allen wrench, which comes with it. It's very small. There's 4 very, very tiny screws. If they fall out, they're very easy to lose, so be careful with those. You can order replacements, but it's just kind of a pain. So you'll want to tighten all 4 of them, not incredibly tight. If you over tighten them, you can damage the blade, but tight enough that you get a little bit of a resistance so that it's keeping the blade in place. This makes it a lot harder to attach the blade than it is definitely on the Disney version, and also a bit on the Hasbro. But what you get for that is this nice, thin, low profile handle, which is much thinner than the other ones, and you can still have that thin neck design even with the blade attached. The drawback, of course, is that since you only have about 1 inch of connection and just 4 tiny little screws keeping it in place, this is not something you're going to want to use for heavy combat. If you smack this around too much, you can rip out those screws. It's also generally not a good idea to do combat with pixel blades, just because with all the LEDs in the blade, if you smack it too hard, you might break some of the LEDs that are inside the blade, and nobody wants to replace a $100 blade. The electronics on the XenoPixel version are much more advanced than the 2 that we've seen so far. For the Disney and the Hasbro, they want it to be just one character, so you only have one set of lights and sounds. With the XenoPixel, it's a general soundboard for general use, so you have the ability to put multiple sound fonts on it, usually between like 10 and 20 come on it, and then you can pull out the SD card and add more and change the ones you want. The drawback of this particular blade is that with the XenoPixel board, a lot of the controls that you can change things on the lightsaber itself are based on how many times the button flashes. This one doesn't flash. So as an example, here's another LGT lightsaber with a XenoPixel. So the board inside this one is identical to the one inside this one. With this one,
power on.
Once it's on, that ring lights up. And that's how you can control it. When it's in standby mode, if you let it flash once,
Volume low.
it can change the volume from low
Mute.
or to mute
Volume high.
to high. If you let it flash twice,
Steady.
that changes the blade effects. So a steady blade is just, it's always on.
Rainbow blade.
A rainbow blade just cycles through all the different colors. And I won't go through all of them in this video, but just to show you, 2 flashes changes your blade effect. If you let it flash 3 times,
Blaster blade.
it changes how the blade lights up. So Blaster blade is off until you hit the button, And then it lights up as if you're shooting a blaster. Let me turn the volume down a little bit.
Volume low.
That's better. So 1, 2, 3 flashes.
Ghost blade.
Ghost blade.
Broken ignition.
So there's all sorts of different kinds of ignitions that you can set. And if you let it flash 4 times, that changes the sound font. Do it again. 1, 2, 3, 4. So each one will change the blade color, the fonts on it, lets you easily cycle between them. While it's on, if you let it flash 1 time, it goes into that clash mode, as if you have 2 lightsabers clashing against each other. Tap it to get back out of that. If you let it flash twice, it starts cycling through the colors very slowly. So it's going into white. Now it's going through the blues. This is how you can select what color you want it to be, and once you get it to where you want it, like I want a nice, yellow, there we go. You just tap it to choose the color. And if you let it flash 3 times, that turns the blade off. So, with a light up button like that, it's very easy to control a lot of the basic functions of the XenoPixel board without having to pull out the SD card and do anything. Now let's go back to this Leia Saber. Again, we have only 1 button and it doesn't light up. Pressing it will bring it out, holding it down will turn it off. But if you want to do any of those things in the middle, you have to guess how long you're holding it down as to how many flashes that would be. You would think that since it's got a big light attached to it, holding it down would have like the bottom LED flash or something like that. But here, so let's see if I can change the volume. 1.
Volume low.
1.
Mute.
1.
Pulse.
Oh, nope, see, I held it down for too long, so it went to pulse instead of changing the volume.
Volume high. Volume low.
Okay, volume low, and now the blade is on pulse. I don't want it on pulse. I have to try and hold it down for 2 flashes, but like 6 or 7 times to cycle through them to get back to the stable blade. So 1, 2.
Mute.
1, 2.
Volume high.
I miss it more often than I get it right. So in order to get it to the settings you actually want, there's a lot of practice you have to do with timing just how long you're holding that button down to cycle through things. It's almost worth just pulling out the SD card, stripping it down to just 1 font and keeping it there. The other frustration I have with this is it doesn't default to the sound font that you would want for a Leia lightsaber. If you pull out the battery, put it back in, this is what it defaults to. So you have to tinker with the options here in order to get it to a regular standard blue blade with the Leia sound font. And so it can take several minutes to get it to the right font. Once you have the settings the way you want them, turn it on, and it looks fantastic. The blade is nice and bright. The speaker is pretty loud. It's not as loud as the speaker in some other ones. I think it's just because of the way that it's vented. There's only a couple of small holes at the bottom for the sound to get out. It's still pretty nice and better than the Hasbro or the Disney. But overall, very nice. Just since it doesn't flash, it's very difficult to use. Now, if you get one of these with one of the more modern versions of XenoPixel that has motion controls, that might be a little bit easier to use since you're not as reliant on the flashing to be able to control it. You can do it by the motions that you do and whether it's pointed up, pointed down, all that. But overall, the XenoPixel is a much more advanced soundboard than the Disney or the Hasbro. Finally, we have the SaberForge Rebel Princess Mark III. This beautiful replica is available directly from SaberForge.com for $220 empty, $330 stunt, that is lights but no sound, $420 with a screw-in baselit blade, or $595 with a NeoPixel blade. Buying it empty and having it custom installed on your own would probably cost somewhere between $500 to $700, depending on your installer and the complexity of your build. This SaberForge hilt is probably the most screen-accurate lightsaber available, with a beautiful matte copper finish all the way down the blade. The silver portion is still very shiny, but you don't get the highly reflective fingerprint magnet that you get on the LGT blade. This is much more what it looks like in the movie, and just, I don't know if it comes across on the camera, but it just looks gorgeous. The mother of pearl inlays on the hilt are also beautiful. They're very iridescent. They don't peel like the Disney ones. They look great. They don't extend up to the switch section. This is the only one that doesn't have the bars aligned over the inlays. So this is one inaccuracy on this one. The other aspect is the switch. It's a very plain metal switch rather than the beautiful pearl inlay switch that you would hope for. The grips are very low profile and, like the LGT, very comfortable to hold. There is a little bit of a snag. The edge of the metal is slightly higher by less than a millimeter than the inlay itself. So there is a bit of a snag when you go back and forth on there. If you hold it in your hand and try to turn it while it's in your hand, you're going to feel it snag a little bit. It's not enough to cut you or really feel too terrible. It's would be nice if they had sort of rounded out the edges of these so that it wouldn't snag as much. But it's a very, very minor thing. If you're using this as a shelf display, you're never going to notice it at all. If you're handling it here, it's mildly noticeable, but definitely not a deal killer. You can unscrew the handle on the bottom to access the chassis inside, which normally would include the battery and all of the electronics. Since mine is empty, I can't show you exactly what that looks like, but you do get the empty chassis with it, as well as the activation switch that you see here. It does have a D-ring that again is nice and firmly attached, so it's easy to pop up, but if you have it down, it's not going to flop around. It's got sound vents on the bottom to let the sound out. No distracting writing on the bottom. It's a very nice replica. On the emitter, it has this beautiful little post built in that makes it look like that's where the blade would come out of if you were in world. That does screw out. It's removable. You can see there's a threaded connector down at the bottom there. To make it easier to get to that connector, the emitter shroud does also come off. That is also where, if you have it installed, there's going to be a metal post that sticks up through here. I have a borrowed version of an earlier model of this that I'll show in a second for what that looks like. But this is where you would take the blade, which has a hole in it to accept that metal connector, which is where the electronics will talk to the blade. This is an older version of the hilt that I borrowed from a friend. So you can see that metal post in there where their electronics would go is what would fit into that hole in the blade. You would take that with the metal post, put them together, and screw them into that same connector where the post would go. Now, it looks weird here just because I've done it without the shroud to show you where it connects. Normally you would have the shroud already attached, and then the blade would go in, and there you would have it. So it's very easy to hold, by the handle. If you wanted to grip it, you could also do it two-handed like that. If you wanted to grip it just by this choke point, you also could do that. It is a little bit abrasive here and here, not nearly as much as you would think. I look at this and I think it doesn't look like there's any way to comfortably grip it. But once you actually have it in hand, enough of your hand is down on the switch section that it's just the one finger and thumb up here, and it actually fits in pretty well. It's a little bit more abrasive than the LGT version is. The LGT one, this is all rounded and very smooth. But it's still pretty comfortable in the hand if you want to spin it or you know, handle it up here. If you want to see how the electronics work with SaberForge's Hero Pixel installation, Sagano Pro has a fantastic review where he shows off the lights, sounds, and motion controls. I'll put a link in the description. If you go to a custom installer, you can outfit it with whatever soundboard, speaker, and fancy features you like. And of course, there's no shame in leaving out the electronics altogether if you just want a gorgeous display piece for your mantle. Now let's take a look at the electronics side by side. I don't have my SaberForge installed, so we'll be looking at the Disney, the Hasbro, and the LGT. For the Disney, remember the ignition button is not the real one. You have to go to the switch down here. The blade is very, very dim. The speakers are pretty decent, but the blade's very dim. For the Hasbro, it's the reverse. The blade is beautiful and vivid and bright. The speaker, very, very dim and dull. LGT, kind of the best of both worlds. An extremely bright, vivid blade. It's kind of hard to tell the blue here. It looks more white just because it's so bright, but this is actually a very vivid blue. And of course, it's got the color selector, so you can pick exactly the right shade of blue that you want. And the speaker's great too. So what do they look like all on at the same time? You can definitely see as you go from the cheapest and the dimmest up to the mid-level and then up to the very, very brightest. You can also see the amount of light that it throws to the side. You definitely get what you pay for as far as blade quality. And just to have the speaker volume side by side for easy comparison, there's the Disney. The Hasbro. And the LGT. And for the side-by-side of the hilts themselves, for the coloring, the Disney has the 3 different colors, none of which are quite right. It's not great. The Hasbro is a little bit better with a nice shiny penny copper all the way through. LGT goes kind of overboard with how shiny they get theirs, which again, not accurate, but kind of pretty. And SaberForge gets the most screen accurate for the body color. For the silver portions, you've got the matte gray on the Disney and the Hasbro, which is actually more accurate. The LGT and the SaberForge are a little shinier than they should be. For the activation button, the Disney one looks fantastic, but isn't an actual button. The Hasbro looks pretty decent and is the button. LGT also looks pretty decent and is the button. The SaberForge goes back to that metal version. It doesn't have any pearlesque to the button. The handle on all 4 of them have nice rounded edges. They're all very easy to hold, so no real comparison there. The D-rings on 3 of them are nice and tight. The LGT has that floppy ring. And the emitter on each of them is very nice in its own way. I do kind of prefer the way that the SaberForge one has that post in the center that looks very nice. For the LGT, obviously you go just straight down to the connector. And you do have a placeholder post in the Disney and the Hasbro as well, but it doesn't look quite as nice as the SaberForge. If you're going for just a shelf display and you're never going to put a blade into it or turn on the electronics, the best money for your money is the SaberForge by far. It's the most accurate, it's the most beautiful, and at $220 for an empty one, it's a steal. If you do want to put a blade in and turn it on, then we need to look at the pros and cons of each version. At $170 for the hilt or $220 with the blade, the Disney one is definitely the cheapest. The blade is very easy to attach, it's got decent speakers, and it's got a nice sturdy swing. The blade's not going to fall out if you smack it against something. On the downside, it's the least realistic looking hilt. The blade is very dim and it lights up in 4 sections rather than 1 LED at a time. Having an activation switch on the hilt is a little awkward, and the inlays tend to peel back, which is repairable but annoying. At $265, the Hasbro is a good balance of form and functionality. It's got the consistent copper coloring, bright, vivid blade, and a great vertical display stand. On the downside, the speakers are not great. The auxiliary button is easy to hit accidentally, and the battery compartment is difficult to open if you forget which of the screws needs to be removed. The LGT version ranges from 3 to 500 with electronics. It's the thinnest of all the hilts, it feels absolutely great in the hand, and it has the ability to add multiple sound fonts, blade styles, and etc. through the Xenopixel or Golden Harvester Profi boards. On the downside, the inlays are metal rather than pearl. The controls are very complex and hard to use considering the button doesn't flash and the Xenopixel requires it to flash. The blade connector is a little fragile since it's only an inch of connection, and the threading on the hilt is fairly delicate. And the SaberForge comes in on the high end from $400 to $600 with the decent electronics. It is by far the most screen accurate of these hilts, excellent build quality, and has many options for electronics. On the downside, it is the most expensive if installed. The blade connector is still a little bit fragile with the screw-in blade, and it has that very basic metal button. What's nice about this spread is that the more money you spend, the better Saber you get, which is a great place to be. Hopefully I've given you enough information to identify which features you care about and which one is going to be best for your budget and your needs. Thanks for tuning in. I hope this has made it easier for you to pick which Leia lightsaber is right for you. I do have more of these comparison videos planned, so please let me know what else you'd like to see, and let me know what you think about the format. Is it too long having all the reviews in one video, or should it be broken up into multiple reviews of each individual saber with a comparison at the end? Let me know what you want to see. Please like the video, subscribe to the channel so more people can find it, and I'll see you in the next one.